and a possibly disturbing development. It concerns a plan to create what have been described as gated communities, which will be patrolled by security guards within Gaza, where Palestinians would live. Look a little bit closer, it seems these security guards are actual mercenaries. The community is less an elite development and more a place where the inhabitants are kept under the rules of the authorities. Scott Lucas joins us to analyse this. Scott's Professor of US and International Politics at the University of Dublin. Scott, thanks for being with us. How would you describe what we've just been talking about?
Well, I think you can link two stories here because, in fact, Israel, before the passage of this bill in the Knesset to effectively ban the United Nations Relief and Works Agency from assisting Palestinians, was considering the use of mercenaries to deliver aid, or purportedly to deliver aid. These would be former British Special Forces working for a private Israeli company. Now we hear that these private contractors, mercenaries, if you will, are being considered to effectively set up, quote, security for, I think, what you might call token communities of Palestinians. So what we're seeing here is that Israel, which is now not only defying the international community, but trying to break the international community in terms of having any role in Gaza, is outsourcing the notion of security. In other words, outsourcing the notion of control of these Palestinian communities and of aid, any aid that might get to these communities, to private firms. Something we've seen before, by the way, with the United States in Iraq almost 20 years ago, the use of mercenaries for similar duties.
It's clearly a big business opportunity too, a $200 million contract. Mordecai Kahana is quoted speaking about it, an Israeli-American businessman. He says that it'll be what they're trying to construct, similar to Miami, but without the pools and without the golf courses. That just sounds like just the tip of the iceberg in terms of telling the story, I think.
Well, it's also a way of dehumanizing what's happening here, because people in Miami might consent to having security firms in their neighborhoods, but they choose to live in Miami in conditions where they are not being bombed, where they are not being starved, where they have some control of their communities. These Palestinians would not have, of course, any control of their communities in Gaza. They would be at the mercy of Israel and at the mercy of these private security firms for getting any type of food, for getting shelter, for getting water. This, in other words, is an effective imprisonment, a continued imprisonment of Gazans. Remember, more than 85% of them, more than 1.9 million, are displaced from their homes. And imprisonment is just simply sticking the name private contractor on it rather than Israel Defense Forces.
Some critics have described it as a program for internment camps. Others have gone a bit stronger and used the word concentration camp. Now, that is a very loaded term, but clearly this concept, and you've just, I think, just taken us to this point, it is really effectively keeping people, perhaps against their will, in a location with barriers, with armed patrols, because they will be. And in a sense, it's criminalizing them before they've even committed a crime.
Well, yeah, again, concentration camps precisely because it's such a political term with historical resonance. Let's just put that to the side and deal with the facts of what we're talking about here. What we are moving towards in Gaza, because this is an open-ended war. There's no foreseeable ceasefire after more than 13 months. There's no foreseeable alternative Palestinian government to Hamas. We are moving towards an Israeli occupation of Gaza. We've had that Israeli occupation of the West Bank since 1967. We now are having Israel, having left Gaza in 2005, going back in for an indefinite occupation. They're not doing it with a single government announcement. They're doing it step by step. And the use of the private contractors is a way to kind of gloss over the fact that this is an occupation in which Palestinians, like those in the West Bank, are entirely at the mercy of what Israel decides they can and cannot do.
And of course, the conflict is already perhaps creating a whole new generation of radicalized youngsters who are growing up seeing their homes destroyed. Would this be presumably another aspect of that? This would be actually serving to create more people who regard Israel as the ultimate enemy?
Well, recognizing that the two countries are different, that the two cases are different, I just would ask your viewers to consider what happened when the United States outsourced some of these, quote, security functions to mercenaries in Iraq after the 2003 operations that removed Saddam Hussein from power. Those private contractors were targets for insurgents. Those private contractors killed not just insurgents, they killed Iraqis. Because what you had is you just had a different dimension of the war that took place. Whereas this is not a direct military conflict that takes place. It is not Israel versus Hamas. It will be Israel and these private firms versus different groups, versus different coalitions of people who will be there to say that they do not accept that occupation and they will adopt violent means to resist it. This will, to adopt that word that you heard from the UN, this will metastasize into a deadlier conflict with a different dimension and with no end in sight.
A recipe for more violence and chaos. Scott, thank you very much for joining us. Scott Lucas, a Professor of International Politics at the University of Dublin. Thank you for your time, sir, and thank you for your very measured analysis of the situation.